We're about to embark on a journey exploring the fascinating world of scents and their immersive applications. We'll meet Liam R. Findlay, a true maestro in the art of olfactory storytelling, in his role as a themed attraction and historical scenting consultant. Sometimes his job really stinks. People that create custom-made smells leave an indelible mark in retail and entertainment venues around the world. From theme parks and museums, scare mazes, and boutique hotels, the ingenious use of scents evokes memories, induces fear, causes revulsion, adds tension, or simply creates serene atmospheres. Today we'll peel back the layers of this olfactory profession, exploring the captivating journey that might lead people into this unique field. So let's dive headfirst into the smells of flowering bouquets, rancid flesh, and ancient burning cities as we welcome the lovely Liam R. Findlay to the Zoom microphone.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm amazing. So awesome to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I like your glasses.
Oh, thank you so much. And I put together a special little background there for you.
Oh, yes. Very nice.
Oh boy, so I'm just very excited to talk to you. So just a little bit of introduction. You are a scent engineer. You work with Aroma Prime in the United Kingdom. You not only design scents for marketing for stores and for customer engagement and maybe sell products, but you create engaging smells for museums and theme parks. So while most people that might be into creating scents focus on flowers and fruits and nice smelling things, you get to create the sense of decaying corpses and mud and all kinds of things. So you're also a theme park historian, which is fascinating. And I have to say that when I mentioned to the people that I worked with that I would be talking to a scent engineer that develops the smells that we get to smell, at the theme park, I've received more of an excited response than I have ever. So there's something very special about your job that is not only fascinating, but mysterious. Like, how do you get into something like this? Is there a moment in your childhood where you were like, okay, yeah, that's exactly it. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. Well, first of all, let me let you introduce yourself. So introduce Liam Findlay.
That's okay. Well, I'll introduce myself and then I'll go into how I started out. So my name's Liam, as you've said, and I am what I call a themed smell consultant, but I kind of change the title depending on what makes most sense to whoever I'm talking to. And I advise theme parks and museums and escape rooms and festivals and lots of different kinds of immersive events on how they can use scents to tell stories, really. And I didn't have a childhood moment of going on Pirates of the Caribbean and sniffing the water and think I need to work in this area. I did like sniffing things as a child, but I never intended to go into smells. And I actually did an animation degree. So I specialized in stop motion animation, which was using puppets, and using my design and storytelling skills from that, I eventually went into escape room design and then designing things for other attractions like castles and theme parks and the likes. And then I knew that Aroma Prime existed, and they're actually 50 years old this year. But they'd recently been bought by new owners, and I wondered if maybe I could use my attractions experience to help advise customers, because I was a bit interested in smells anyway. So I thought, let's see if I can use my experience to kind of guide customers from an attraction design perspective. And I've stuck with them for 5 years now.
Amazing. So when you realized that there's this company that existed that creates smells to engage your guests and take them to another level of participation in the environments that they were in, what was your process? What kind of schooling did you need to go to and certifications did you have to attain in order to start pursuing this career?
Well, I suppose it's such a niche area because it's not like traditional perfume where you might train to be a perfumer. And it is very much, in my role, I very much focus on the attraction design and storytelling. So, and you don't really, at school, they don't really teach you how to be a theme park designer or a theme park smell maker. So a lot of it was learning along the way and just using my experiences and learning on the job as well. So I don't make the smells personally. I kind of direct a team on how to develop them in certain ways. And because the company's so old, we've got a massive library of over 500 smells. So there's lots of kind of old formulas that we refer to. But I've had to learn a lot about regulations and the technology and kind of learning how to apply that into my existing knowledge and researching past uses of smells over the last 50 years or so, which is around how long artificial smells have been used properly, so to speak, in theme parks. It's been very handy helping inform me on what I do today.
Awesome. So you're saying that these smells in theme parks have been around for about 50 years, which, I guess Disneyland is about 75 years old. Is Disney one of the first entertainment establishments that started using aromas in engaging guests?
Yeah, Disney and also Efteling. I think the earliest example I could find of artificial smells being used to the theme park was Efteling in the Netherlands, but they failed on that occasion because they tried to do it outside and the trees were neutralizing the smell. So it didn't work so well. And then the Disney parks started out using like air fresheners, and it would be standard smells like berries and flowers. So not so much rotting bodies and that kind of thing. Not that they would today anyway. But there wasn't really specialist equipment for the needs of theme parks back in the early days, which is why Aroma Prime was founded, because there weren't any scenting companies that specialized in this area. And actually, back in, I suppose it would have been the late 70s, lots of people know about the Smellitzer, or at least the name of it, which was developed for the Epcot dark rides to make sure that the scents were targeted at visitors as they passed, because it was like a cannon, so it would shoot past their noses and then it would be sucked up by a vent at the other end of the room. So prior, in the early stages, they were using shop-bought things that weren't very impressive or effective, and then they had to end up making their own things, which is why a specialist company, namely Aroma Prime, ended up coming into being to kind of help theme parks out, especially the ones that couldn't afford to develop their own technology.
You mentioned Epcot, and I mean, there's scents all over Disney. And I'm sorry if I focus on Disney, but when I think of a company that uses scents outside of retail stores, it's definitely Disney. I've been coming here since the 70s. And it's funny because some of the scents that I smell when I walk into the Contemporary, does Contemporary use a smell like in their lobby? Because I feel like I'm back 5 years old, like walking into that hotel because of the smell. But when I mentioned that I was going to be talking to a scent engineer, the very first thing that came up was Rome is Burning from Spaceship Earth. And they not only know that smell, but it's their favorite smell. They actually go out and buy candles that have been themed. They're called Rome is Burning. The candles, it's called Rome is Burning. And they've done a pretty good job, they say, of replicating the scent of passing by that scene in Spaceship Earth. You also touched on a part of a question that I was going to have, is how they get that smell out of the air. Because when you're in Journey into Imagination, when you're going to smell the skunk, Figment puts that skunk smell in the air, and then you're out of the room. But 10 seconds later, there's another group coming in, and that aroma can't be lingering. So, and how do you so there's a vent that sucks all that out real quick, so that to get that fresh, non-scented smell in the room.
Yeah, you'll have a few different methods that different parks will use. So it could be ventilation and kind of targeted scenting to make sure it travels in a certain direction. I know that Disney parks like using scent beads. So they're kind of little, they could be ceramic or kind of plastic beads that have been soaked with aroma. So air passes over them to disperse the smell. And that can be a bit more subtle than actual oil being sent into the air as a mist. That kind of subtlety allows the kind of limited spreading of the smell when the air is passing over it. The founder of Aroma Prime, one of his earliest projects was a dark ride that I think was probably inspired by Spaceship Earth. It's at Jorvik Viking Center, and you travel through an old Viking village, and that's very stinky. And he was advising on the blueprints of the ride to kind of make sure that the smells flowed as best they could, and also so that they wouldn't cross into other scenes. So he might have said that let's put a wall up here, or a pig pen or whatever, so that this smell stays here and doesn't go over there. So it depends on the designers of the ride. They might kind of consider these things early on in that level of detail, or sometimes they'll just think about smells at the very end, and that's when they might come across challenges because they haven't thought about it too much.
You think of how much these scents mean to you when you're actually in the ride, but in the design process, they must be the last thing that is usually considered. And then they were like, oh, well, let's get this in there. And then after that fact, you're saying that once the walls are up, it's harder to manage the spread of the scent. So it should be considered at first with everything else, is what you're saying.
Yeah, preferably. And also scents can take a long time to put together. So you don't really want to be ordering at the last minute, because then you might find that the lead time is months into the future. And actually, something kind of on this topic, the spread of smells was something that they considered really early on with Pirates of the Caribbean, because they wanted to put a smoky smell in the burning town scene. But because the technology was less developed back then, there was risk of the smoky smell kind of traveling to the queue or the loading area, and then you don't want guests thinking that the place is on fire. And they have, I understand there are smells in it now with the more controlled technology that there is today. So it's interesting to look back on what they tried previously in terms of limiting the spread of the smells.
Pirates, of course, is another very scent-rich attraction. And the first scent you have is the smell of the water when you're getting into the boat. How much of that is just dirty water, and how much of that is a scent that they actually put into the air?
Yeah, the water smell comes from the bromine, which is used to clean it mostly, and also I imagine kind of some mildew. But it's interesting how with lots of historically inspired attractions, like the burning Rome smell, for example, or the accidental smell of the water with Pirates of the Caribbean, it's meant to be historically inspired. If we say the burning Rome smell, for example, it's sometimes the smell might be carefully researched, but then as it's used in a contemporary setting in a ride, it kind of gets its own layer of history, in that people start associating the smell of Rome burning with Spaceship Earth. And there are candles and YouTube videos, and you could kind of write a chapter on the history of the smell in that perspective, in that regard. So it's interesting when you're building a historical setting, how kind of the accidental things, or the things that were meant to be historical, kind of grow their own histories in the process.
And also on Pirates, one of the first scenes that you pass through are the two ships fighting. Now, when I was younger, I felt like that scent of gunpowder was a bit stronger. Like, I felt like when I was younger, it would almost burn my nose. And it really isn't as strong now. Do rides kind of tone down their use of scent? It becomes more aware that some people might be more sensitive to some of these scents. Is that what happens? Because maybe I'm just remembering it incorrectly. But when I was younger, I felt like it was a much stronger scent. Does this happen? They tone it down?
Yeah, attractions are always kind of tweaking, and sometimes it can depend on how much control the designers have over a ride once they hand it over, because they might design a load of smells that are put in, but then it's just technicians who are in charge of topping them up and ordering them in. And maybe those technicians, the technicians might change over the years, and then they'll forget which smells went here, and you might have slightly different smells coming in, or people who work the machine slightly differently. So it might be accidental that they change, but sometimes it can kind of just be about the time period. Maybe in some rare cases, there might have been some kind of unfortunate disaster, and you don't want a certain smell that takes people back to that. In fact, going back hundreds of years, if we go back to when I think it was Hamlet was performed in Shakespeare's time, they would use a smoky smell kind of created by a firework effect, because the gunpowder plot had just recently happened when Guy Fawkes was planning to blow up Parliament. So that was kind of a good way of connecting people's minds to recent events. And yeah, sometimes, whether it be current events or whether it just be feedback from guests, sometimes tweaks will be made.
Psychology in scent. It's reminding you of a very emotional or maybe devastating event that has recently happened. In your words, what role do scents play in the psychology of engaging in a museum exhibit or when riding through a theme park attraction?
Well, our smell receptors are connected to the part of the brain that processes memories and emotions. So when you sniff something, you'll often be taken back to a personal memory, which is kind of the fun thing about smells, because you might want to evoke certain reactions, but often it's very much based on people's personal smell memories. So at Tokyo Disney Sea, they use a banana smell in the Sinbad ride because that's a nice generically pleasant smell that people from all over the world will be familiar with and they'll enjoy, and they'll probably have pleasant memories of it. So you might want to keep that in mind. In scare mazes, they'll use smells like vomit, because people have very personal, visceral memories of the smell of vomit. And in scare mazes, they want you to feel uncomfortable and on edge. Or there's a theme park, Alton Towers in the UK, they use a fire smell in the Wicker Man queue. It's a wooden roller coaster, and that's to kind of trigger that feeling of that primal feeling of fight or flight, and that kind of excitement that the smell of fire can bring up in you. And especially as it's a wooden roller coaster, you kind of you're on edge before you ride it because you can smell smoke. So there are lots of kind of exciting tricks that you can play based on people's very primal connections to smells.
And like what I said earlier about walking into the Contemporary, and I felt like I was five years old again. There's a memory that was triggered, and like walking on to Pirates of the Caribbean, I remember that smell from when I was like 7 or 8 years old. There's a memory retention in scents that I think is triggered actually more accurately than what your eyes and ears can remember. So can you say something about that? Like, why do I remember the exact smell when I smell something decades later when I walk into a room?
Well, I believe we're able to remember smells a lot better than we can remember things that we've seen or heard. They kind of stay in our memory for longer. And also when you smell something, your brain processes it much faster than you process other senses. So if you see something, it will go into your brain and it will kind of pass through different areas and then you'll react to it emotionally. Whereas with a smell, you'll react to it emotionally and it will trigger memories before you've even registered what it is that you're smelling. So it's a very fast and direct sense. Yeah, so it's very powerful, and I suppose it's kind of handy to theme parks that they can use this because, like with the candles, for example, it almost becomes a kind of marketing tool because people, or it might not even be because of candles. You might be walking down the street and you think, oh, I can smell Rome burning, and suddenly people are talking about your theme park. So it's a nice way to, that connection to memories is a good way of keeping your attraction in people's minds.
You're talking about Rome burning and all these smells that are kind of universally liked. You've also talked about vomit in a scare maze. What are some scents that are universally disliked? Because having lived around the world, I know that different cultures react to different things very differently. So I'm sure that, decaying flesh and vomit are two smells that are kind of universally disliked. What other things that, as Westerners, would we be surprised at that someone from another culture just cannot stand?
Yeah, it is something important to think about because there was a study, for example, with people from Germany who smelt marzipan, and then people from Japan smelt it, and the people from Japan thought it smelled like sawdust. Or French Canadians smelt a certain smell and they thought it smelt of sweets, and then French people smelt it and they thought it smelt of medicine. So it's good to be aware of the cultures that you're working with. And for example, when we're working with the Middle East, they like the smells of coffee a lot, but you can't go anywhere near the smells of alcohol because that's not really not often a culturally acceptable thing there. So yeah, it's interesting to see how people react to smells in different places. And I think when you're a baby, you're not born with any dislike of any particular smell. It's something that's learnt, but you can often count on the fact that people won't like the smell of vomit and urine and that kind of thing because you don't really need to be especially culturally aware to know that that's not a pleasant experience.
So you're creating these scents. You've got everything from pleasant flowers to the burning of Rome to vomit. How do you compose these scents and distribute them, knowing that there's a significant portion of the population that might be allergic to many different things? You can't have a disclaimer in front of every ride saying, by the way, you might be inhaling nuts. So how do you get past that?
Well, there are abundantly strict regulations set by the IFRA, who are in charge of all the scents that are made for shampoos and soaps and diffused scents as well. So they'll set limitations on certain ingredients. So they'll say you can only use 0.0001% of this ingredient if you're making a soap, or it tends to be a lot safer when things aren't applied to the skin because that's when allergies are often an issue. When it's just in the air, it's almost comparable to walking down the street or smelling perfume or something. The risks are, because of all those regulations, the risks are incredibly minimal. So I've never experienced anyone having an adverse reaction, but we always provide safety data sheets to customers who request them so that they can, if they have any concerns, they can look through and make sure that everything is to their liking in terms of the safety. So it's all very watertight, and I haven't I'm not aware of any issues so far.
So when you're designing these sets, like let's say you go to another country, you're talking about creating this Viking village. Do you create the smell of a pig pen by imagining what a pig pen might smell like? Or do you take a trip to a farm, sit in a pig pen and take notes? And when you go back to the lab, and I guess you don't design them specifically, but your company does. But when you get back to the lab, how do you maintain that olfactory image in your brain so that you can create that exact smell? So that you say, that is exactly what I smelled when I was sitting with the pigs. How do you do that?
It depends on what's available. Often we'll smell real things as often as we can. And often, like if we're doing a pig pen smell, then we'll ask for the pig pen to be sent to us if we can, in terms of mud or poo. We've had otter poo sent to us and jaguar urine. So we can sniff the real thing against our experiments. We might work with experts, so making the smell of a T-Rex. Back in the 2000s, our company worked with paleontologists who had fossil evidence of the meat stuck between the T-Rex's teeth. So we could kind of conclude that they would have had very stinky breath. And yeah, it depends on what's available, or we'll just make lots of notes and try our best. But often we'll send samples to the customer so they can have a sniff. And the customer, if it's a museum in particular, they'll often have experts on the team or people that have actual memories of historical events. Like we worked with a doctor recently who used ether in his practices, and we made an ether smell, and he could kind of sniff our samples and decide which one was most accurate. So yeah, it depends what's possible at the time. We'll try our best.
That is actually really fascinating. What are your top 5 scents?
I think if we're thinking of aroma prime scents,
no, you personally, what do you love? Well, and it can be vomits too. I don't care. What are 5 things that you think are just the coolest smells in the world?
I often say the smell, which is an aroma prime scent, the smell of the Black Death, which was a smell that was at a historical attraction when I was growing up. An aroma prime had made that, and I have a kind of nostalgic connection to that. I suppose I'll throw in Pirates of the Caribbean water, like anyone would. I like kind of old, musty smells. I suppose, perhaps because of my job, I like the smell of lemongrass. And I like, I have a perfume called Hypnotic Poison, which I think is very pleasant.
We put a link to that in the description for the videos. People can look that up. One of the questions that I was wanting to ask you is for people with disabilities. Say someone cannot see, cannot hear, or maybe they are deafblind. You're giving them a chance to engage in a museum or a theme park in the way that they normally would not have. They can smell where they are. What have been the reactions for people like that you know of that have had the chance to engage and participate in something simple that everyone else gets to do so easily?
I have kind of secondhand feedback from the attraction owners, but I know even in scare mazes, they like to use where there's often a lack of lighting. I suppose almost anyone can have trouble seeing in a dim scare maze. But often the idea is that the smells can help tell the story if certain other means of telling the story are removed. So if you can't see or hear the cannons firing, but you can smell the gunpowder, then you can kind of tell what's happening, but also tell what kind of scene this is. It's probably an action scene. Or if you smell something particularly pleasant, you say the smell of flowers, it might help you realize that it's an outdoor scene, or that this is kind of a more peaceful part of the story. So there are kind of lots of connotations that you can get from smells that can help people's understanding if they can't pick up those cues from what they can see or hear or feel, as the case may be.
I want to get to a couple other things. First of all, I wanted to mention that on your social media, your header of you with one of your colleagues riding a roller coaster with your eyes closed with a smell sample in front of your face has to be one of the best things I've ever seen. Not only does it show how quirky and fun you are, but how much you love your job, which I think is just absolutely amazing. Smells have kind of permeated your life in a way because you've written a children's book that incorporates smells into a little girl that communicates with ghosts through the sense of smell.
Welcome to the Olfactory Factory, where the smells of your sweetest dreams and most rancid nightmares are created. Have you ever smelt a ghost? Most people haven't, but Colette Planchette has. A superbly supernatural sense of smell lets her talk to the dead with her nose. This comes in handy considering her best friend Lucien is a ghost. When the pair find themselves in a village of eerie shop window dummies, the stench of danger becomes ever closer. Someone or something is watching. The Doomtown Dummies, a novel by Liam R. Findlay. You'll be pinching your nose in fear.
Tell us about that book.
Thank you. I have a copy here actually on the shelf. So it's called The Doomtown Dummies, and it's about Colette Planchette, who can talk to the dead. She can sniff. All different souls have their own smell. So she's got this friend Lucien, who's a ghost inside an umbrella handle, and she can sniff his words, and she can sniff the presence of ghosts. And there's lots of kind of olfactory descriptions. And there's actually a company that makes smells for theme parks and museums in this as well. They're rather sinister and suspicious, unlike Aroma Prime.
I love this. This is so great because you know why? It's so different. It's absolutely way out in left field, and it's definitely not Harry Potter. So just a couple of pop culture things. Have you seen the movie Polyester?
It's a dead end. Hey, why don't you come on in?
I've heard of it. Now, I hope to watch it.
Are you kidding?
I'm writing it down now because it sounds like I need
The Smell-Sorama, like the 70s, you scratch and sniff movie, that was amazing. I think that you're interesting. I think you're fascinating, and you're adorably peculiar, I guess. I see your posts and I just want to know more. And you dress very dapper, and you're in a scent engineer, but you're not wearing a hard hat and a vest. You're wearing, paisley ties and, bright purple jackets, and you embody your profession. And I think that you're absolutely interesting and amazing. And I'm going to put all the links in the video so that people can learn more. Thank you so much. I hope I get to talk to you again sometime.
Thanks to you. Well, I just want to say thank you for having me on. Sorry that my lighting is so shadowy, which I only recently realised.
Oh, yeah, it's got
mysterious. It's like a dark ride.
The smell of death surrounds you.